Hello TMS Logic students. This is the second half of the teaching for our class today that we weren't able to have at school, so we're doing it through our great technology. We're going to talk about Chapter 2, Mood in Syllogisms, and I hope that you've already read it because this is going to be just a brief discussion since this recording is only 15 minutes long. And it's not a very difficult subject, and it goes along really well with figure, working almost the same way but a little different. So let's look first at the definition of mood. Mood is the disposition of the premises according to quantity and quality. In other words, when we're trying to determine the mood of a syllogism, we're going to look at what type of statements are being used for the major, minor premises and the conclusion. And we have the four options, A, E, I, and O. And the arrangement of those statements is going to give us the mood. So let's look at an example. If the major premise is an A statement, the minor premise is an E statement, like all rabbits can hop, no fish can hop, therefore no fish is a rabbit, we would say the mood of the syllogism based on the type of statement that the major premise is and the minor premise is, the mood is AE. Now, the textbook will, as we combine the various moods along with the figures that we studied in Chapter 1, oh, sorry, I need to go back. We had a few cautions we wanted to talk about. We talked in Book 1 that sometimes the major premise is the second proposition in a syllogism, and the minor premise is sometimes the first proposition. And when we use the 7 rules of validity to determine if a syllogism is valid, it doesn't really matter that those are in the right order, but when we're going to be working with the mood of a syllogism, and particularly when we start using the mnemonic verse that William of Sherwood creatively invented for us to work with, it always, always, always assumes that the major premise is the first proposition, the minor premise is the second proposition, and of course, always the conclusion is the third proposition. So when you're composing your syllogisms, or we're using this verse to determine if a syllogism is valid, we need to keep that in mind. The major premise comes first. The major premise has the major term, which is the predicate of the conclusion. The minor premise comes second. It has the minor term, which is the subject of the conclusion. And the conclusion, of course, is the combines through the identity of the middle term, will combine and allows us to make that deductive inference regarding the subject and the predicate. All right. In your textbook, it's showing that we have 16 moods when we combine all the different proposition statement types, and we have 4 figures. So how many combinations does that give us? $64. That's a lot. Are we going to have to memorize all 64? No, we are not. We only want to concern ourselves with the valid syllogisms, and how many of them are there? 19. And how can we remember all 19 combinations? You're right, we're going to memorize William of Sherwood's mnemonic verse. It's very, very creative. It's going to tell us more than just which syllogisms are valid. We're going to learn as we move into chapters 3 and 4 more about syllogisms and reducing them. But we'll talk about that later. Right now, we just want to look at the mnemonic verse a little bit closer, see what it's telling us. Now this is what I have put together when I made my note card, and I will be uploading this to Bravillo if you want to use it, but or else you can just write it out yourself. But what I did do is try to put a pronunciation guide here. These terms are interesting but can sound funny and very difficult to pronounce, but that's one of the reasons I put this together, so that I could remember how to say it. So let's look at this first for just a minute. On the very top line, as you will see here, the reason it's the first line is that these are the valid syllogisms in the first figure. So it's going to mean that anytime we construct a syllogism or look at a syllogism in the first figure, the middle term is going to be in the sub-pre position. It's going to be the middle term will be the subject of the major premise, the predicate of the minor premise. And now we can see that the vowels themselves represent the mood of the syllogism, telling us in this, let's look at the barber right here. The A means that the major premise is an A statement. The next vowel tells us that the minor premise is an A statement and that the conclusion is an A statement. So even though when we talk about mood, the book refers us that the mood of a syllogism is the major and minor premise, when we use the mnemonic verse, we will include the conclusion. So if we had a barber that we were looking at, we would say the mood is AAA. Celerant, the next one. My mouse keeps fading out, so that's probably why it's hopping around the screen here. We have 3 vowels, and in each of these names, there's only 3 vowels because we only ever have 3 propositions, 2 premises and 1 conclusion. So in Celerant, the E is the major premise, A is the minor premise, and E is the conclusion. And we'll just go across to Darii. The major premise will be an A statement, the minor premise will be an I statement, and the conclusion will be an I statement. And the next one, Ferio, again, all in first figure. The major premise will be an E statement, the minor will be an I statement, and the conclusion will be an O statement. So following this down, all the syllogisms in second figure, the middle term will be the predicate of the major premise and the predicate of the minor premise. And we pronounce these Cesare, Camistris, Festino, Barocco. In the third figure, the middle term will be the subject of the major premise, the subject of the minor premise. These are pronounced Darapti, Desamis, Datitsi, Philapton, Bacardo, Ferison. And in our fourth figure, lost my mouse here again, the middle term will be in the predicate of the major premise and the subject of the minor premise, and we pronounce these Brahmantip, Kaminis, Damaris, Fesapo, Fresison. Now we will be saying these in class each week so we can get used to how we pronounce them and begin just to memorize these. Now, like I said before, this is not ideally how we would determine if a syllogism is valid. The easiest and quickest method to determine validity are the 7 rules of validity. So we don't want to just put those aside because we're learning this. But we're going to find out that this verse is going to be extremely helpful when we go to construct syllogisms, and even more when we learn what an enthymeme is, which is a syllogism that's missing one of its propositions, the major, the minor, or the conclusion. And we will want to figure out what that proposition is that's missing, and this verse will help us back into that, or as they say, extrapolate the syllogism so that we can see the missing premise. Alright, so I will upload this if you want to use it, or you can, very helpful to print it, to write it out yourself, but it might help for you to put the pronunciation with them. So how do we use this verse? As the book says, there's 3 steps when we want to use it to write out a syllogism, to construct a syllogism, or to look at a syllogism and decide if a syllogism is valid. So here we're going to look and see, is this syllogism valid? So the first thing we need to do is determine the figure. And let's work with this. All mice are scary. Mickey is a mouse, therefore Mickey is scary. So the figure in this syllogism is sub pre. Therefore it is a first figure. Now I look at the type of propositions that make up the syllogism. The major premise is an A statement, the minor premise is an A statement, and the conclusion is an A statement. So I have a mood of AAA. So the figure is first figure, sub pre, and the mood is AAA. So I go back and I look. I know it's first figure, so it should be on this line. And I look and I see I have an AAA. So it's Barbara. Therefore, this is a valid syllogism. So that's how we use the mnemonic verse to check and see if syllogisms are valid. First look and determine the figure, because the figure is going to tell you which line to look on the verse. The first figure, second, third, or fourth. First line, second, third, or fourth line. Once you know the figure, then look at the mood. Look at the vowels, the 3 vowels that comprise the syllogism in the proper order, major, minor, conclusion. And then look and see if that is on the list. If we were looking at a third figure, look and see if it's one of these. If it's not, then the syllogism is invalid. All right. I want to draw your attention to a textbook correction. And I can't use the page number because we all have different editions, but it is the last page before you start your textbook exercises. And it's the paragraph right above the summary. It states that starts out, note also that the final letter is important. That needs to be corrected to read, note also the final vowel is important. So you may have a question when you get to that. All right, homework for this week. Be certain to make a note card with the mnemonic verse. Like I said, I have not yet, but I will upload my card. You may skip questions 17, 23, and 35, asking you to write out the mnemonic verse over and over again. Just going to ask you to do it once. Question 45 asked you to construct syllogisms in these using the 5 common ones. And I forgot to mention, so let me go back quickly to the mnemonic verse. The ones I have in red, if you'll notice, these right here are in red. They are the 5 common syllogisms, the 5 most common forms of the syllogisms when they're used. So that's why I put those in red. And they are going to ask you to construct a syllogism in each of these 5 forms. So what I am going to do after I'm running out of time, we have less than a minute, and I'm not going to be able to complete my instruction on how to construct a syllogism in these forms. So I'm going to do another teaching on that. It'll be part 2 of chapter 2. I hope that this has been helpful and is in the prior ones. Please post any questions on Bravillo, and I'll respond to those so everyone can see it. Great, and I hope that you are enjoying your day. Thank you.